Today on TOKKANTE, as promised in one of my previous videos about the top 5 green dial divers, I'm doing a hands-on review on the Glashütte Original green dial and a little bit of a comparison to its bigger brother, the SeaQ Panorama Date. So I'm not going to go over the company's history, I'll just do a little recap on the collection, and then I'll talk about the good, and there's a lot of good, but I'm not just a Glashütte fanboy, so we'll also talk about the bad and even the ugly. Hi everyone and welcome, I'm Ben. So you may know Glashütte Original as a more, dressy-oriented watch brand, but actually this is not the first time that they released a sport collection. Back in 2008, they had released the Sport Evolution sports collection, and they were very well made. They were actually the first collection to introduce the micro-adjust clasp just before Rolex actually did it in their Submariner. So they were very well made, but probably underappreciated at the time, and they didn't sell quite well. I've heard it's only a few hundred pieces, and in 2011 they were discontinued. And still now, they are very appreciated, I think, by true collectors. Some of them are quite hard to find. You find a lot of chronos, but the automatic and especially the GMT are hard to find. So in 2019, Glashütte Original released a new sports collection, the Specialist collection, and in honor of the 50th anniversary of the 1969 GUB type PRTS 200. So now you have to remember that in 1969 GUB was a nationalized company based from Alanko Unzene and all the other independent watchmakers, and after the war they made it into one company called GUB. It was not a luxury watchmaker, so that particular Type 200 was not a luxury watch. But taking inspiration from that, then they released a new SeaQ collection. So they had two models within that line. The SeaQ itself, so that's true to the original, the 1969 one at 39.5mm. They had two, the regular model and then the limited edition model at 69 pieces, which is now long sold out. And then they had the bigger version, the Panorama Date, a more modern interpretation with the signature Panorama Date from Glashütte Original. So the small one is the one that we're going to focus on. At the beginning, they were not quite popular. A lot of people disregarded them because they were also quite expensive. But I think over the last 2 years, they've released a lot of different models, especially after they came up with the blue dial with the applied indices versus, the faux lume transferred indices from the first one. People started paying more attention, and then the bicolors came for the Panorama Date version, and now it's a little bit like the Vacheron Constantin Overseas, which took about 5 years before it became a waitlisted watch. So I think now finally people are paying attention to the Glashütte. So now in 2021 they came up with that version, the Reed Green Dial, that I talked about in my previous video about the top 5 green dial, which you can watch here. And that's the one that I'm interested in mostly because this one is so understated and very discreet, and the green, I think, is very timeless. So that's the one that I asked to see at the boutique, but of course I'll take a look at the other ones as well to compare. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the price. Yes, it's expensive. It's $10,200 on the bracelet, and the Panorama Date version at 43 is $12,500. So yes, it's expensive. I know a lot of people. I saw actually a comment on the Monochrome article of someone saying, "Whoa, it's more than a sub. Wow, how can you justify it?" Well, I mean, it's on a different level. Do you also complain that the Blancpain 50 Fathom is more than a sub? Then if so, you can probably stop here. But if you understand that now we are talking about high horology, then let's take a look at the good, the bad and the ugly. So first, let's look at the good. There are quite a fean points in this section, so we might be here for a while. I want to recap the characteristic of the watch, since I forgot to do that in my previous section. So we're looking at 39.5mm in diameter, true to the original from 1969, by only 12.15mm thin, which is very thin for a diver. 200 meters of water resistance and 40-hour power reserve. So this is a watch that is 95% made in-house. I mean, there are very few brands, even major brands, that can achieve 95% in-house. Now, when we look at this watch from, the overall look of it, you can tell that this is, very well made. I mean, immediately you will notice that this is much better than a Rolex Submariner, for example. So I'm not going to compare every point to the Rolex Sub. You can do that for yourself and decide, but you see where I'm going with this. For example, if we look at the side brushing of the case, it is vertically brushed, done by hand, and this is more challenging and technically difficult to do than a horizontal brushing. Also, if you look at the crystal, for example, so this is sapphire crystal, but it's made to look like a vintage plastic crystal that will, distort the indices of the dial, and it will give a very charming effect, a very vintage effect, but with the benefits of sapphire. So now, speaking of the dial, Glashütte Original is very famous for its dial. They are excellent. They are like a cut above the rest. They're way better than a lot of other dials. There are very few other brands that actually make their dials in-house. A lot of brands will outsource the dial. They make the dials in Pforzheim in Germany, which is a city famous for gold and for jewelry. Which is why the indices that are applied on this version, they really sparkle and look like little pieces of jewelry. I mean, the dials are amazing. The bezel. We can't talk about a diver without talking about the bezel action. So the bezel action on this one is very good. It's very precise. There is no backplay at all. You can feel the German engineering that went into the developing of this bezel. And it does not sound at all like a Rolex Submariner or a Tudor Pelagos, for example. It's a different feel. If you want to get an idea, it sounds to me more like a Blancpain 50 Fathom. So if you like that bezel action, then you love this one. Now, if we look at the bracelets, for example, the bracelets are very well constructed. They're screwed, of course, no pins here, and the screws are in the underside of the bracelet itself. So, from the side, you can't see anything and it looks pristine. So for those of you who don't like, the faux rivets on the Black Bay 58, you'll find none of those here. So the construction, very, very nice, very high quality, but also most importantly, the clasp. So this clasp is very small and very thin, much thinner, for example, than an Omega diver clasp. Or even the Rolex clasp. It's thin, but it still has a micro adjust built in, which is one of the best systems you'll find, because you can adjust the watch while you're wearing it. You don't need to take it off, and you press the Geo emblem on the clasp and you can adjust. You have 8 positions, so it's not as much as a Rolex sub, for example, which is 20 millimeters. So here I'm guessing if it's 1 millimeter per increment, it might be 8 to 10. It's less, but it's plenty enough, and you can do that while you're wearing the watch. So now, if you're looking at the case back is also very nice. It's an engraved case back, which has the GO logo and the trident, and then 20 waves to symbolize the 20 ATM or 200 meter of water resistance. And it's a nice case back. Some people might think, well, it's not a see-through, I want it to have a see-through. But if you are a traditionalist and you are of the stance that dive watches should have a solid case back, then this is the best engraved case back that you'll find compared to a lot of other solid case back in the industry. A little detail that a lot of people may not notice at first is when you unscrew the crown, the tube is actually red. So that gives you a visual indication that you need to screw the crown back. And this is a nice little touch that you used to find on the Tudor Black Bays before. Now let's talk about the movement, which you can't see, but it's an in-house movement that is hand finished. So it is started with machine, but then you'll have all the chamfering or beveling of the edges that are finished by hands. It has, fine swan neck regulator. It has polished screws that are not blued, but they are polished, and it has a skeletonized dial. So it's a very nicely finished movement. We'll talk about the movement in the next section, but it's a good, nice in-house movement. Then speaking of movement, let's talk about the testing. This watch is actually, or this movement is adjusted in 6 positions. So this is something you find only in high horology watches. So Blancpain, for example, will adjust their movements also in 6 positions. But most others, like Omega or Rolex, will only do it in 5 positions. Also, they will test in at 4 different stages of the power reserve. Usually this is done only at 1 stage, I think, or 2. I think Metas is doing either 2 or 3, but no one is doing 4 stages, and Glashütte is doing it. Also, in terms of testing the watch for diving, they do 2 different kinds of tests. The watch is compliant with ISO 64 and 25, and also the DIN, I think, 8306, which tests for moisture and then water resistance and pressure. So the Germans, they don't fool around with procedures and certifications, and they do this very properly, and they will give you a certificate that the watch has gone through all these tests, and you can rest assured that this watch is actually good for the job. I mean, yeah, sure, no one will use it to go diving, but you have you can rest assured that this is a watch that can do the job, and this is luxury, right? You may not want to do it, but it can do it. Speaking of luxury, I want to talk about the positioning of this watch, right? To me, this is not just a luxury watch, this is high horology watch. It is competing with the likes of, Jaeger-LeCoultre, JLC, or Blancpain, or even possibly, entry-level models of Vacheron Constantin. When I'm talking about JLC, I'm thinking it's even better than the entry-level JLC model, and I think it's competing even with the mid-range or high-end of JLC. It is that good. This is, definitely a step above or two from Omega and Rolex. I've talked about, the wearability of this watch, that it fits like a glove. It is a perfect, daily wear. It is like a high horology version of the Tudor Black Bay 58, and I stand by that. When I try this watch on, I feel like this is a classy, elegant luxury diver. This is kind of a very understated, but kind of stealth wealth, if you want to talk about pricing, because a lot of people say it's very expensive. But I think people who know this is a quality piece. Now, it's not all good. Unfortunately, it never is. So let's talk about the bad. And there are a few things that, in my opinion, but this is only my opinion, I think are bad. So first is the PCL, those polished center links. I don't like them. I don't think they have a place in a tool watch, even a luxury tool watch. It reminds me of the PCL on my Datejust. And after 5 years of use, they are scratched, right? Hairline scratches. So of course you don't want to have it repolished all the time, so you have to live with it, and it doesn't look so good, and that's why I wish the bracelet did not have those PCL. I don't like them. And from the PCL, next point is the end links. The end links are brushed, vertically brushed, which makes no sense because it doesn't match with the polished center links, but also it doesn't match with the brushing of the case. The brushing of the case is circular or concentric, which then doesn't match up really with the end links and then with the PCL. So I understand that this is almost unnoticeable, but the problem is that once you know it, then you know it. And if you're a little bit OCD like me, then it's there and you don't like it. So I know the alternatives. You could go for the synthetic strap, or you could go for the rubber. Now the synthetic one to me is not that comfortable. I think if it was like the Blancpain 50 Fathom and it had a lining underneath, then probably it would be better. But to me, just wearing it in the store, I find it's not comfortable, and I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't like it. And rubber, living in Hong Kong and how hot and sticky it is, I don't think rubber is the solution for me. I'm a bracelet guy. I want the bracelet. If I'm gonna get this, I'm gonna get it on the bracelet, and unfortunately it has those PCL. Okay, the next point is the movement. Okay, so contentious point, the movement is the 3911, which is quite an older architecture movement. And when you're paying, over $10,200 for the bracelet version, I feel like I still have some issues with the movement. It does not have a free sprung balance wheel. It doesn't have the silicone hairspring. It's only 40-hour power reserve, and you can even see it. So now I talked about it in my previous video about the top 5 green divers. I mentioned that, compared to the caliber 36 of the Panorama Date, which one has the free sprung balance wheel, this one has the silicone hairspring, this one has 100 hours of power reserve on a single barrel. This one is meant to be, the flagship or the new standard for Glashütte Original. So of course, you could argue that a longer power reserve on a single barrel is not necessarily a good thing. This is up to you, but I feel like they should have done something to upgrade that movement, because I think at least they could have probably installed a silicone hairspring, because I was told and I read somewhere that even in the later models of the Sport Evolution back in 2011, during service, Glashütte Original used to replace the hairspring with a silicone hairspring. I can't guarantee, I don't know if that's true, but I've read it in forums, and so if they did that back then, that means they could have upgraded this one here. Now another issue is that you can't even see the movement. Now, You know, a lot of what you're paying with Glashütte Original is the hand finishing, and so that includes also the finishing of the movement. But unfortunately, you can see that. So yes, the solid case back is engraved and it's beautiful. So depending on whether you're a traditionalist or not, you might prefer that. The sales associate told me she preferred the engraved case back, but remember, she's here to sell me a watch. I think I would prefer to see it. Because it's quite well finished at least, and I would like to see that, and I can't. Now, speaking of the panorama date, the date is another issue that I have with this one. Is that it does not have the panorama date, and this is kind of the signature complication of GO, is that panorama date. It's like the ground date for A. Lange und Söhne. I feel like if I'm only going to have one watch from Glashütte Original, I want to have that panorama date, and here I don't have it. I just have a regular standard date. And I know that it is technically possible because in the Sport Evolution that they had released back in 2008, it was the same movement, 3911, and it was possible. So I wish they would give us that panorama date on the SeaQ. And finally, my last point, the ugly, the nasty, the cheap. Yeah, I know, that's the point that you all want to hear about. Actually, there's only one point in this one. It's going to be pretty short, but it's one that really bothers me. It's the rotor mass. The 3911 movement historically always came with a 21 karat gold rotor mass. And now in the SeaQ, in this model only, they've replaced it with what they call, you know, heavy metal mass. I've read in several places that it's tungsten. It's like what JLC is doing. And I think, you know, this is cheap, this is terrible, because even though you cannot see it behind a solid case back, now you know that they're trying to somehow cut cost and, you know, going cheap on you by replacing it with the tungsten rotor mass. Now, if you get the caliber 36 in a panorama date version, you still get the 21 karat gold rotor mass. And I think this is the only movement now in the entire collection of GO that doesn't get the gold rotor mass. And why do they need to do that? I mean, it's not like there is so much gold that they would save so much money on it, but probably it's just because, well, it's in the back of the solid case back, nobody's gonna know about it. You know, when you go for Blancpain 50 Fathom, for example, even if it's behind a solid case back, you know that the 1315 movement inside is finished to the exact same standard, and it has the same gold rotor. And it's a bigger rotor, by the way, so there's more gold in that one, but you're still getting it. But here they feel like, okay, they're just gonna go El Cheapo on you and give you a tungsten one. This is what JLC is doing also in their Polaris Memovox and Polaris chronograph in their latest collection. They've replaced their historical gold rotors with a tungsten rotor, and I think this is not okay. At least to me, I feel like this is just cutting cost, and for a high horology brand to be doing this, I just don't like it. So in conclusion, I have a dilemma here. This is not a perfect world, and neither are these watches. I feel like I love the SeaQ, its wearability, its discretion, and how it fits like a glove, but at the same time, I would love to have the panorama date and, you know, the upgraded movement of the bigger version, the SeaQ panorama date. And also, you know, if you can stretch to 10K, then you can probably do 12K and go for the bigger one. But then the panorama date version, you know, is bigger and mostly it's thicker at 15.75 millimeter thick. So this one feels less like a daily wearer kind of watch. And also, once you're in that sort of budget, you're starting to look at the Blancpain 50 Fathom. So my question is, which one would I regret buying? Should I go for the smaller version and live with the fact that it has the older architecture movement in it and make my peace with it, but at least I can wear it every day? Or do I want the greatest and latest from GO, but most likely I'm not gonna wear this watch every day because it's just too thick and too heavy? Let me know what you think. I don't know, I haven't made up my mind yet. Share your opinion with me. Let me know what makes you tick. Thank you for watching this video. As usual, subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.